The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Penelope Grant's knees hit the dry earth. Her trembling hands clasped together so tightly, her knuckles turned white as she whispered prayers into the scorching Utah afternoon of 1876. She had been riding for 3 days straight from Salt Lake City. Her father's labored breathing growing weaker with each passing mile until finally, just 2 hours ago, he had slipped from consciousness entirely. Now he lay beneath the sparse shade of a juniper tree 20 feet behind her, his fever burning so hot she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, even without touching him. The town of Tropic was supposed to be close, someone back in Panguitch had said, but the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, and Penelope had never felt more alone in her 21 years of life. "Please," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Please, I cannot lose him too. Not after Mother, not like this. Send someone, send anyone. I need a miracle." The sound of a horse's hooves on packed earth made her eyes snap open, but she did not rise, did not turn. Probably just another traveler who would pass them by like all the others on this God-forsaken trail. Her throat was too dry to call out anyway, her voice too hoarse from 3 days of rationing water between herself and her father. The hooves stopped. Boots hit the ground. Then a shadow fell across her, blocking out the brutal sun. "Madam," the voice was deep, roughened by wind and sun, but there was something gentle in it that made her finally look up. The man standing there was tall, lean in the way men got when they spent more time in the saddle than anywhere else. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a dusty black hat, but she could see his jaw was strong, his eyes the color of creek water, clear and steady. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. Dust covered him completely, and she realized he must have been riding hard to get wherever he was going. "Madam, are you hurt?" He asked again, and this time he began to lower himself down, his knees bending as he knelt in the dirt beside her without any concern for the dust now coating his pants. Penelope tried to speak but only managed a choked sound. She turned, gesturing desperately toward where her father lay. The cowboy's eyes followed her gesture, and she saw understanding flash across his features. He was handsome, she realized distantly, in that weathered way men of the frontier often were, with sun lines around his eyes and a mouth that looked like it knew both laughter and hardship equally well. "He is dying," Penelope finally managed to rasp out. "Fever took him 3 days ago. I have been trying to reach Tropic, but I do not know if we are close, and I have no more water, and he needs a doctor desperately, and I was just praying for someone, anyone to help us." The cowboy met her eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, something Penelope would remember for the rest of her life. There was no judgment in his gaze, no hesitation, only a quiet determination that made her believe, for the first time in 3 days, that perhaps her prayer had actually been heard. "Then, I am your answer," he said simply, as though it was the most natural thing in the world to say. "My name is Mason Thatcher, and I am going to help you." He rose fluidly, despite having been in the saddle all day, and moved toward her father with purposeful strides. Penelope scrambled to her feet, her legs protesting after kneeling in the dust, and followed him. Mason dropped down beside her father, pressing 2 fingers against his neck, checking his pulse. Then he placed a hand on the older man's forehead and swore softly under his breath. "How long has he been unconscious?" Mason asked, already pulling his canteen from his belt. 2 hours, maybe 3. "I cannot be certain. The sun makes time feel strange." Mason nodded, carefully tilting water into her father's mouth, not too much at once. "Tropic is about 4 miles east of here. I just came from there this morning. There is a woman there, Mrs. Henderson, who has some medical training. She is the closest thing to a doctor for 50 miles. Hope flared in Penelope's chest, so sudden and fierce it hurt. 4 miles, truly, truly. But we need to move him carefully. That fever is dangerous. Mason looked up at her, his creek-water eyes serious. When did you last drink water yourself? I gave the last of mine to Father this morning. Without a word, Mason pressed his canteen into her hands. Drink. You are no good to your father if you collapse from heat sickness yourself. Penelope wanted to argue, but the moment the canteen touched her lips, her body took over. She drank deeply. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. Mason watched her for a moment, then turned his attention back to her father, checking him over with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with illness and injury before. What is your name? Mason asked as he worked, his hands gentle as he repositioned her father's head to help him breathe easier. Penelope Grant. This is my father, Peter Grant. We were traveling from Salt Lake City to Tropic. Father received a letter saying his brother had passed and left him some land. We were coming to claim it, to start fresh after Mother died last winter. Something flickered across Mason's face, sympathy perhaps, or understanding. I am sorry about your mother, and I am sorry this journey has been so hard. But you did the right thing, keeping him in the shade, trying to get water into him. That probably saved his life. The praise made Penelope's eyes burn with fresh tears. For 3 days, she had been terrified she was doing everything wrong, that every decision was one step closer to losing her father forever. To hear someone say she had done well, that she had done right, was almost more than she could bear. Mason stood again, surveying the area. My horse can carry your father. It is not ideal, but it is faster than trying to get him back on your mount. Can you ride a few more miles? I can ride to the ends of the earth if it means saving him, Penelope said fiercely. A small smile touched Mason's lips there and gone like a shadow. Then let us get him loaded up. We are burning daylight. Together they managed to get Peter Grant onto Mason's sturdy roan gelding. The horse, to its credit, stood steady as stone while they arranged the unconscious man across the saddle. Mason secured him carefully with rope, making sure he would not slide off even if the horse had to move quickly. Penelope noticed how careful Mason was, how his hands never once handled her father roughly, and she felt a wave of gratitude so strong it made her knees weak. You ride ahead, Mason said, handing her the roan's reins. Follow the trail east. You will see Tropic when you crest that rise. He pointed to a gentle slope in the distance. I will get your supplies and follow on your horse. You would trust me with your mount? Penelope asked, surprised. Mason looked at her steadily. You just told me you would ride to the ends of the earth for your father. I reckon I can trust you with my horse for 4 miles. They set off, Penelope in the lead, moving as quickly as she dared with her father secured to the roan. The horse responded to her commands easily, and she sent a silent thank you to whatever force had sent Mason Thatcher across her path. Behind her, she could hear her own mare following steadily, Mason murmuring soft words to keep the tired animal moving. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Tropic came into view. It was small, perhaps 30 buildings clustered together where the canyon opened up to reveal slightly more forgiving land. Red rock cliffs rose dramatically on 3 sides, and Penelope could see green patches that suggested water sources, precious and rare in this desert country. Smoke rose from several chimneys despite the heat, and she could see people moving about their business on the main street. Almost there, Mason called from behind her. The Henderson place is the second house on the left once you reach the main road, White fence out front, cannot miss it." Penelope urged the roan faster, her heart pounding. They clattered into town, drawing stares from the residents. A man in a blacksmith's apron stopped his hammer mid-swing to watch them pass. Two women in bonnets paused their conversation to point. Penelope ignored them all, her eyes fixed on the white fence Mason had described. She saw it and pulled the roan to a stop so abruptly the horse tossed its head in protest. "Help!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Please, someone help!" The door to the house flew open and a woman emerged, perhaps 50 years old, with silver threading through her dark hair. She took one look at the scene and moved into action. "Bring him inside quickly now," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Mason Thatcher, is that you back there?" "Yes, madam," Mason replied, swinging down from Penelope's mare. "Found them on the trail. Man has been fevered for 3 days." Mrs. Henderson nodded briskly. "Get him inside. Put him in the back room, you know where it is." Together, Mason and Mrs. Henderson got Peter Grant off the horse and into the house. Penelope followed, her legs shaking now that they had finally stopped moving. The interior was cool and clean, smelling of herbs and soap. Mrs. Henderson directed them to a small room at the back of the house where a narrow bed waited, freshly made with white sheets. They laid Peter down, and Mrs. Henderson immediately began her examination, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She checked his pulse, his eyes, felt the heat of his skin. Then she started barking orders. "Mason, fetch water from the well as cold as you can get, and grab the bucket and rags from the kitchen." "Miss, what is your name?" "Penelope Grant, madam." "Miss Grant, I need you to help me get his shirt off. We need to cool him down immediately." The next hour passed in a blur. Mrs. Henderson proved to be exactly what they needed, knowledgeable and calm under pressure. She had them cooling Peter's body with wet rags, getting water and medicine past his lips in tiny amounts, watching for any signs of improvement or decline. Mason stayed through it all, fetching whatever Mrs. Henderson needed, his presence steady and reassuring. Finally, as the sun set and lamplight filled the room, Mrs. Henderson sat back with a sigh. "The fever is starting to break," she announced. "He is not out of danger yet, but he has a fighting chance now. Whatever you did out there, Miss Grant, kept him alive long enough to get help." Penelope felt her knees give out. She would have hit the floor if Mason had not been there, his hands catching her elbows and holding her steady. "Easy," he murmured. "When did you last eat?" Penelope tried to remember and could not. "Yesterday, the day before." Everything had blurred together. "That is what I thought," Mason said. "Mrs. Henderson, do you mind if I take Miss Grant to get some food? She is about to keel over." "Go on," Mrs. Henderson said, waving them away. "I will watch over your father, dear. You go get yourself fed and rested. He will need you strong when he wakes up." Penelope wanted to protest, to insist she stay by her father's side, but her body had other ideas. She let Mason guide her out of the house and down the street to what turned out to be a small boarding house with a dining room that served meals. The proprietor, a round woman with a kind face, took one look at Penelope and immediately set about filling a plate with beef stew, fresh bread, and vegetables. Mason sat across from her, his own plate in front of him, and Penelope realized this was the first time she had really looked at him in proper light. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and those remarkable pale blue eyes. His face was lean and tanned, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that suggested a life that had not always been easy. But there was something fundamentally decent about him, something that showed in the way he had not hesitated to help, the way he had stayed to make sure her father was cared for. "Thank you," Penelope said quietly. I do not know how to properly thank you for what you did today." Mason shook his head. "No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Penelope said firmly. "They would not have. 3 people passed us on the trail today before you came. None of them stopped." Something hardened in Mason's expression. "Then they should be ashamed of themselves." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The food was simple but delicious, and Penelope felt strength returning to her body with each bite. Outside, full night had fallen, and she could hear the sounds of tropics settling down for sleep, the occasional voice calling good night, a dog barking in the distance. "What brought you out on the trail today?" Penelope asked. "You said you were leaving Tropic this morning." "Delivering a horse to a rancher north of here," Mason explained. "I work at the Double T Ranch about an hour's ride from town. We breed and train horses, supply them to ranches and settlers throughout the territory. I was heading back when I heard that gunshot." "What gunshot?" Mason looked at her curiously. "You fired a gun about 10 minutes before I came upon you. That is what made me come investigate." Penelope frowned, then remembered. "Oh, that was not me. I thought it was just a hunter somewhere in the canyon." "Well, whoever it was, they probably saved your father's life. If I had not heard it and gone to look, I would have taken the northern fork and missed you entirely." They looked at each other across the table, and Penelope felt something shift in her chest. Providence, her mother would have called it. The hand of God arranging circumstances just so. Whatever it was, she was profoundly grateful for it. "Tell me about the Double T Ranch," she said, wanting to know more about this man who had saved them. Mason's face softened when he spoke about the ranch. It was clear he loved the work, loved the horses. He described the land, the herd they maintained, the training methods they used. He spoke about the ranch owner, a man named Thomas Thornton, who had given Mason a job 6 years ago when he had first drifted into Utah territory looking for work. "Thomas taught me everything I know about horses," Mason said. "Gave me a chance when I had nothing to offer but a willingness to work hard. I owe that man everything." "You have been here 6 years then?" Penelope asked. "Do you like Utah?" "I do. It is hard country but honest. The land does not lie to you. If you work hard and treat it with respect, it will provide. If you are careless or lazy, it will kill you." He said it matter-of-factly, without drama. "Where were you and your father living before?" "Salt Lake City. Father worked as a clerk in a mercantile. It was steady work, but after Mother died, everything reminded him of her. When the letter came about his brother's land, he saw it as a sign that we should start over." Penelope looked down at her plate. "I was not sure leaving was the right choice, but Father was so certain. He said Tropic was a good town, that we could build a life here." "It is a good town," Mason confirmed. "Small, but the people here look after each other. The land your father's brother left, do you know where it is?" The letter said it was east of town, near the creek. 20 acres with a cabin already built." Mason nodded slowly. "I know that property. Jacob Grant's place. I am sorry for your loss. Jacob was a good man, kept to himself mostly, but always fair in his dealings. The cabin is sound and the land has good water access. You could do well there." "If Father recovers," Penelope said quietly. "He will," Mason said with such certainty that Penelope found herself believing him. "He has you fighting for him, and Mrs. Henderson is the best there is. He will recover." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily despite having just met. Mason told her about Tropic, pointing out through the window which buildings housed which businesses, who she should trust, and who to be wary of. He told her about the Sunday services held in the schoolhouse, about the social gatherings that happened once a month, about the best place to buy supplies, and the rancher who would sell her chickens when she was ready to start building up the homestead. In turn, Penelope told him about her life in Salt Lake City, about her mother's illness and death, about her own dreams of having land to call her own, maybe keeping bees and a garden. She told him about the books she loved to read, and how her mother had taught her to sew and cook, and all the practical things a woman needed to know. She found herself sharing things she had not spoken about in months, the words flowing out of her like water from a spring. Finally, as the dining room began to empty and the proprietor started giving them meaningful looks, Mason stood. "I should let you get some rest," he said. "Mrs. Henderson has a room here at the boarding house she keeps for family members of people she is treating. Mrs. Walsh will show you to it." Penelope stood as well, suddenly not wanting him to leave. "Will you be here tomorrow? I need to get back to the Double T, check in with Thomas, let him know what happened. But I will ride back into town tomorrow afternoon to see how your father is doing." He paused. "If that is all right with you." "I would like that very much," Penelope said, and meant it. Mason smiled, a real smile this time that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "Then I will see you tomorrow, Penelope Grant." He left, and Penelope watched him go through the window, watched him swing up onto his roan and ride off into the darkness. Mrs. Walsh appeared at her elbow, a knowing look on her round face. "That Mason Thatcher is one of the good ones," she said conversationally. "Been watching him since he came to these parts. Works hard, keeps his word, treats everyone fair regardless of who they are. You could do worse than to have him for a friend." Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "He saved my father's life today. I am grateful, that is all." "Of course, dear Mrs. Walsh said, but her tone suggested she did not believe that for a moment. "Come along, let me show you to your room." The room was small but clean, with a real bed and fresh sheets. Penelope barely managed to remove her boots before she collapsed onto the mattress and fell into the deepest sleep she had experienced in days. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices outside. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory came flooding back. She dressed quickly in the same dusty clothes from yesterday, made a note to herself that she needed to retrieve their belongings from the horses, and hurried down to the dining room. Mrs. Walsh provided a breakfast of eggs and toast, and Penelope ate quickly before hurrying to Mrs. Henderson's house. The older woman answered the door looking tired but pleased. "He woke about an hour ago," she said, before Penelope could even ask. "Weak as a kitten and confused about where he is, but the fever has broken completely. He is asking for you." Penelope rushed to the back room and found her father propped up on pillows, pale and drawn but unmistakably awake and aware. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Penny girl," he croaked, using his old nickname for her. "What happened? Where are we?" Penelope pulled a chair close to the bed and took his hand, so relieved to see him conscious that she had to blink back tears. She told him everything about the terrible 3 days, about her desperate prayer, about Mason Thatcher appearing like an answer from heaven itself. Peter Grant listened, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. When she finished, he squeezed her hand weakly. "I need to thank this man," he said. "We owe him a debt." "He says we owe him nothing," Penelope replied. "But yes, I think you should thank him anyway. He is planning to come back this afternoon." She spent the morning with her father, feeding him the broth Mrs. Henderson prescribed, helping him sip water, just being present as he drifted in and out of sleep. Each time he woke, he seemed a little stronger, a little more like himself, and Penelope felt the tight knot of fear that had lived in her chest for 3 days finally beginning to loosen. Around midday, Mrs. Henderson brought lunch for both of them, a simple meal of bread and cheese and apples. Peter managed to eat half of his portion, which Mrs. Henderson declared a good sign. Then, Satisfied that her patient was truly on the mend, she left them alone to rest. "Tell me more about this Mason Thatcher," Peter said once they were alone. He was propped up again, looking tired but alert. "What do you want to know?" Penelope asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Mrs. Henderson tells me he sat here for an hour yesterday helping care for me, a complete stranger. That is not common behavior. I want to know what kind of man does that." Penelope thought about how to answer. "He works at a horse ranch north of town. He has been in Tropic for 6 years. Everyone seems to respect him. He is kind and steady, and when I was praying for help, he appeared and said he was my answer." She looked at her father. "I believe he was, Father. I truly believe God sent him to us." Peter studied his daughter's face for a long moment. "You like him?" It was not a question, but Penelope answered anyway. "I barely know him. But yes, what I have seen I like very much." "Then I look forward to meeting him properly," Peter said, and closed his eyes to rest again. Mason arrived in the early afternoon, riding into town on his roan with his hat pulled low against the sun. Penelope saw him coming from Mrs. Henderson's window and felt her heart do a strange little skip. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief that he had come back as promised, but she knew it was more than that. Something about Mason Thatcher called to something in her, something she had not known was waiting to be called. She met him at the door before he could knock. "He is awake," she said by way of greeting. "The fever broke. Mrs. Henderson says he will recover fully with rest." The relief that washed over Mason's face was genuine and profound. "Thank God. I have been thinking about you both all day, wondering and worrying. Would you like to meet him? He has been asking to thank you." Mason followed her inside, and Penelope led him to the back room. Peter was awake, sitting up with pillows supporting his back, looking frail but alert. His eyes sharpened when Mason entered, taking in the cowboy's appearance with the assessing gaze of a father meeting a man his daughter clearly admired. "Mr. Grant," Mason said, stepping forward and removing his hat respectfully. "I am glad to see you awake. You gave everyone quite a scare." "Mason Thatcher," Peter said, his voice still weak but steady. "My daughter tells me I owe you my life. She says you appeared when she was praying for a miracle." "I was just on the right road at the right time, sir. Anyone would have done the same." "My daughter tells me that is not true. She says 3 people passed them by before you came." Peter's eyes were sharp despite his weakened state. "I am a man who believes in providence, Mr. Thatcher. I believe God places people in our paths for a reason. I would like to properly thank you for being in our path." "Your thanks is more than enough, sir. I am just glad I could help." They talked for a while, Peter asking about the ranch, about Tropic, about the land he had inherited. Mason answered all his questions patiently, his manner respectful but not obsequious. Penelope watched the 2 men talk and felt something settle inside her, seeing them get along so easily. Finally, Peter's energy began to flag, and Mrs. Henderson appeared to shoo them all out so he could rest. "He needs sleep more than anything now," she declared. "Miss Grant, why do you not show Mr. Thatcher around town? You have been cooped up in this room all morning." It was obvious manipulation, but neither Penelope nor Mason seemed to mind. They stepped outside into the afternoon sun, and Mason offered her his arm. Penelope took it, feeling the solid strength of him through his sleeve. "Have you retrieved your belongings yet?" Mason asked. "From yesterday," Penelope gasped. "No, I completely forgot. We left everything on the trail." "I brought it all back," Mason assured her. "Your bags are at the boarding house and your horse is at the livery stable being properly cared for. I settled the bill there already, enough for a week." "Mason, you cannot keep doing things like that. You have already done so much." "I wanted to," he said simply. "Besides, you can pay me back someday if it bothers you that much." They walked through Tropic together, Mason pointing out various landmarks and introducing her to people they passed. Everyone they met seemed to know and respect Mason, and they all welcomed Penelope warmly when he explained who she was and what had happened. The kindness of these frontier strangers touched Penelope deeply. They ended up at the edge of town where the creek ran, clear and cold from the mountains. Cottonwood trees grew thick here, providing precious shade, and the sound of running water was soothing after the harsh silence of the desert. "My father's land is near here," Penelope asked, "about a mile upstream. Do you want to see it?" She did desperately, but she shook her head. "Not without father. When he is well enough, we will go together." Mason nodded, understanding. They sat on the creek bank, watching the water flow past, and Penelope found herself more at peace than she had been in months. There was something about Mason's presence that calmed her, that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her mother died. "Can I ask you something?" Mason said after a while. "Of course. Yesterday, when I found you, you were praying. Do you really believe prayer works?" "That God hears and answers," Penelope considered the question carefully. "I do. Maybe not always in the way we expect or want, but yes, I believe he hears. Why do you ask?" Mason picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "I have not prayed in a long time, 6 years to be exact. I used to when I was younger, but then some things happened that made me question whether anyone was really listening." "What happened?" "My family," Mason said quietly. "I grew up in Kansas, had a mother, father, 2 younger sisters. We had a small farm, nothing fancy, but it was ours and we were happy. Then when I was 20, a group of raiders came through. They burned farms, stole stock, killed anyone who resisted." He paused, his jaw tight. "My father tried to protect us. They shot him dead in our doorway. Then they burned the house. My mother and sisters were inside." Penelope felt her breath catch. "Mason, I am so sorry. I survived because I was in the barn, heard the commotion and went to help, but by the time I got there it was too late. I tried to get into the house, but the fire was too fierce. I just had to stand there and listen to them scream." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Penelope could sense the ocean of pain beneath those calm words. "After that, I could not stay in Kansas, could not stay anywhere that reminded me. So I drifted west until I landed here, and I have not prayed since the night I watched my family burn." Penelope reached over and took his hand. He looked startled, then his fingers curled around hers, holding on like she was anchoring him to the earth. "I am so very sorry," she said again. "No one should have to endure that, and I understand why you stopped praying. But Mason, can I tell you what I believe?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. "I believe God does not cause the evil things that happen. People do that with their choices and their cruelty. But I also believe God can take those terrible things and somehow work them into something else, something that still has purpose. You have been in Utah for 6 years. How many people have you helped in that time? How many horses have you trained that carried families safely across dangerous country? How many kindnesses have you done that made someone's hard life a little easier?" "I do not know," Mason admitted. "Probably more than you realize. And yesterday, you were in exactly the right place to save my father's life. If you had not left Kansas, if you had not ended up here, if you had not been on that trail at that moment, my father would be dead and I would be alone in the world." She squeezed his hand. "I am not saying your family died so you could save my father. That would be cruel and wrong. But I am saying that even though a terrible thing happened to you, you chose to still be good, to still help people, and that matters. That is prayer in action, Mason. That is being the answer to someone else's desperate plea." Mason was quiet for a long time, staring at the water. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. No one has ever put it that way before. My mother used to say that we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can always control who we choose to be because of it. You chose to be good. That takes courage. Mason turned to look at her, really look at her, and Penelope saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was more than gratitude, more than friendship. It was recognition, as though he was seeing something in her that he had been searching for without knowing he was searching. "You are extraordinary, Penelope Grant," he said softly. "I knew it yesterday when I saw you refusing to give up, refusing to let your father go without a fight. But talking to you now, seeing how you think about the world, I realize extraordinary might not be a strong enough word." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am just ordinary, I promise you that." "No," Mason said firmly. "You are not, and I think somewhere deep down you know that." They sat together by the creek as the afternoon stretched into evening, talking about everything and nothing. Penelope told him about her childhood, about learning to read from her mother, about the dreams she had for the future. Mason told her about training horses, about the satisfaction of taking a wild creature and teaching it to trust, about the beauty of the Utah landscape that he had come to love. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and hated tomatoes, that they both wanted children someday, and that they both thought the night sky in the west was more beautiful than anything they had ever seen. When the sun began to set, painting the red rocks in shades of orange and gold, Mason reluctantly said he needed to head back to the ranch. Thomas would be wondering where he was. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Penelope asked, not caring if she sounded too eager. "Yes," Mason said without hesitation. "If you want me to, I do, very much." Mason smiled, that transformative smile that reached his eyes. "Then I will be here." He rode off into the gathering darkness, and Penelope walked back to the boarding house feeling like she was floating. Mrs. Walsh gave her a knowing look but said nothing, which Penelope appreciated. She ate dinner in a daze, checked on her father once more, pleased to find him sleeping peacefully, then went to her room. That night she lay in bed thinking about Mason, about his kindness and his pain, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious. She thought about his hands, strong and calloused from hard work, and the gentle way he had cared for her father. She thought about his voice, the way it wrapped around her name like a caress. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have scared her. They had only known each other for 2 days. But somehow it felt right, felt inevitable, like everything in her life had been leading her to that moment on the trail when she had prayed for help and Mason Thatcher had appeared. The next week passed in a sweet blur. Mason came to town every day, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, whenever he could spare time from the ranch. He always brought something: fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, a book he thought she might like, wildflowers he had picked on the ride over. They spent hours together, walking through traffic, sitting by the creek, just talking and learning about each other. Peter continued to improve steadily. By the 4th day he was able to get up and move around a little. By the 7th day Mrs. Henderson declared him well enough to leave her care, though she cautioned he needed to continue resting and not overexert himself. Throughout it all, Peter watched his daughter and Mason together, and what he saw clearly pleased him. On the evening of the 7th day, after Mason had left to ride back to the ranch, Peter called Penelope into his room at the boarding house where Mrs. Walsh had moved them. "Sit down, Penny girl. We need to talk." Penelope sat, her heart suddenly pounding. "Is something wrong?" "Are you feeling worse?" "I am feeling fine. Better than I have in months, actually." Peter took her hand. "I want to talk about Mason Thatcher." "Oh," Penelope said, her cheeks warming. "Father, I can explain." "You do not need to explain anything. What I have seen this week is a good man treating my daughter with respect and care, and my daughter blooming under that attention like a flower in rain. What I want to know is how you feel about him." Penelope took a breath. "I think I am falling in love with him. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a week, but Father, when I am with him, everything feels right. He makes me want to be braver, better. And when he looks at me, I feel seen in a way I have never felt before." Peter nodded slowly. "And how does he feel about you?" "I think he feels the same. He has not said anything directly, but the way he acts, the way he looks at me, I think he cares for me too." "He does," Peter confirmed. "Yesterday, when you went to get food, Mason asked my permission to court you properly. He wanted to make sure I approved before he spoke to you about his intentions." Penelope's heart soared. "What did you say?" "I told him I thought you were more than capable of making your own decisions, but that he had my blessing if you were willing. He is a good man, Penny. I have asked around town about him. Everyone speaks highly of him. He works hard, treats people fairly, keeps his word. Those are the qualities of a man worth having. He has been through so much," Penelope said quietly, and told her father what Mason had shared about his family. Peter listened, his expression growing somber. "That explains the sadness I see in his eyes sometimes. But the fact that he went through that and remained good, that he can still be kind and help others, that tells me everything I need to know about his character. Tragedy either makes a man bitter or makes him compassionate. Mason chose compassion. So you truly approve?" "I do. And whenever he works up the courage to speak to you directly, I expect you will make him very happy by accepting his courtship." Penelope threw her arms around her father, careful not to squeeze too hard since he was still recovering. "Thank you, Father. You do not need my thanks. Just be happy, Penny girl. After everything we have been through this past year, we both deserve some happiness." The next day was Sunday, and Mason rode into town early to escort them to the service at the schoolhouse. He looked nervous when he arrived, his hair slicked back with water, wearing clean clothes and his best hat. Penelope answered the door and felt her breath catch at the sight of him. "Good morning," Mason said, his voice a little rough. "I was hoping I could walk with you and your father to the service." "We would like that very much," Penelope replied. The three of them walked to the schoolhouse together, Peter leaning on a walking stick but steady on his feet. The building was packed, with families crowding onto benches and spilling out the doors. The service was simple but heartfelt, led by a circuit preacher who came through Tropic once a month. Penelope found herself actually listening to the sermon, about trust and faith, and several times she felt Mason's eyes on her. Afterward, people swarmed them, welcoming Peter to the community and introducing themselves to Penelope. Several women invited her to a quilting circle that met every Thursday. A rancher told Peter about a man in town who could help him get his new land ready for planting. Everyone was kind and welcoming, and Penelope began to understand why her uncle had chosen to settle here. As the crowd thinned, Mason touched her elbow gently. "Can we talk? Just the two of us?" Penelope's heart began to race. "Of course. Let me tell Father." Peter waved them off with a knowing smile, getting drawn into a conversation with some of the local ranchers about cattle prices. Mason led Penelope away from the schoolhouse, toward the creek where they had spent so much time over the past week. When they reached their usual spot under the cottonwoods, Mason turned to face her. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with his hat brim. "Penelope, I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how to say it properly, so I am just going to speak plain." "I like it when you speak plain," Penelope encouraged. Mason took a breath. "A week ago, I was just going about my business, living my life same as always. I was not unhappy, but I was not really happy either. I was just existing, going through the motions. Then I heard a gunshot and went to investigate, and I found you. And in the week since then, everything has changed. He took a step closer, his eyes intense on hers. When I am with you, I feel alive in a way I have not felt in 6 years. You make me want to be better, do better. You make me think about the future instead of just surviving day to day. And I know we have not known each other long. I know by all rights I should wait months before saying any of this. But Penelope, life is too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel. He reached out and took her hands, holding them gently in his larger ones. I am in love with you, completely, utterly in love with you. And I would like permission to court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you find you can love me too. I do not have much, just a job and a horse and a little money saved. But I am a hard worker, and I would spend every day of my life making sure you were happy and safe and cherished. So what I am asking is, Penelope Grant, will you let me court you? Tears sprang to Penelope's eyes, but they were happy tears. Oh, Mason, you do not need to ask if I can love you. I already do. I have been falling in love with you since the moment you knelt beside me in the dust and said you were my answer. Yes, I will let you court me. Yes to all of it. The joy that lit up Mason's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Penelope wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling like she had finally come home. Thank you, Mason whispered against her hair. Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me how you feel, Penelope replied. I was beginning to worry I was imagining the connection between us. Mason pulled back just enough to look at her face. You were not imagining anything. From that first moment, there was something between us. I felt it, and I am grateful every day that you felt it too. They stood there by the creek, wrapped in each other's arms, and Penelope felt a peace settle over her soul. Everything they had been through, all the pain and loss and struggle, had led them to this moment. And while she would never be grateful for the suffering, she could be grateful for where it had brought her. Mason bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not want to. She tilted her face up, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was Penelope's first kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed a kiss could be. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. I should probably take you back to your father before people start talking, Mason said reluctantly. Let them talk, Penelope said boldly. But yes, we should go back. Father will want to know what was said. Hand in hand, they walked back toward town. Peter took one look at their joined hands and their happy faces and grinned. Well, it is about time, he said. I was beginning to think I would have to intervene and hurry you two along. Over the next few weeks, life in tropics settled into a happy rhythm. Peter grew stronger every day, and soon he was ready to go see the land he had inherited. Mason took them out to the property on a bright morning in late June. The land was beautiful, 20 acres nestled against the creek with red rock cliffs rising behind it. The cabin Jacob Grant had built was small but sturdy, one room with a loft, a good fireplace, and a porch that looked out over the valley. There was a barn that needed some repairs and a chicken coop that was still sound. Peter walked the land with the eye of a man seeing his future, and Penelope could tell he was already making plans. This is good land, he said finally. With water access and protection from the cliffs, we can make a real home here. We will help you fix it up, Mason said. Thomas has already said he can spare me a few days to help with repairs, and some of the other ranchers will pitch in too. That is how things work out here. People help each other. They spent that day and many others working on the property. True to Mason's word, neighbors showed up to help. They repaired the barn roof, fixed the chicken coop, helped Peter till a garden plot. The women brought food and supplies, and several of them spent a day helping Penelope clean the cabin from top to bottom. Through it all, Mason and Penelope's courtship deepened. He came to see her every evening after work, and they would walk or sit on the porch and talk for hours. He told her about his dreams for the future, about wanting his own place someday, about the horses he wanted to breed. She told him about wanting a family, about the children she hoped to have, about the life she wanted to build. They talked about everything except the obvious, when they would get married. Both of them knew it was coming, but they were savoring the courtship, these sweet days of falling deeper in love. On the 4th of July, Tropic held a celebration with food and games and dancing. Mason invited Penelope to be his partner for the evening, and she accepted eagerly. She wore her best dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and Mason could not take his eyes off her. They danced together as a local fiddle player provided music, and Penelope thought she had never been happier. Being in Mason's arms, moving to the music, surrounded by their new community, she felt like her life was finally exactly where it was supposed to be. As the evening wound down and the sun set over the red cliffs, Mason pulled her away from the crowd toward the creek. The moon was rising, full and bright, turning the water silver. "I have something for you," Mason said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box, and Penelope's heart began to race. Mason opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the moonlight. "It was my mother's ring," Mason said quietly. "One of the few things I managed to save from the fire. I have carried it with me for 6 years, never thinking I would have someone to give it to. But Penelope, I want to give it to you. I want you to wear it as my wife." He dropped to one knee in the grass, still holding the box. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life. I love you more than I thought I could love another person. You brought light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever. Will you marry me, Penelope Grant? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Tears streamed down Penelope's face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, Mason, I will marry you. I cannot imagine anything I want more." Mason stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as though it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, deep and sweet, and Penelope felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in the schoolhouse, with the whole town in attendance. Peter walked Penelope down the aisle, beaming with pride. Mason waited at the front, looking handsome in a new suit, his eyes locked on his bride. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They exchanged vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Mason kissed her, the whole room erupted in cheers. The celebration lasted late into the night, with food and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. But eventually, Mason pulled Penelope away, and they rode out to a small house on Double T Ranch land that Thomas had given them as a wedding present. It was just one room for now, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. Mason carried Penelope over the threshold, and she laughed with pure joy. Their wedding night was sweet and tender, Mason gentle and patient, both of them learning each other in the most intimate way. As they lay together afterward, Penelope's head on Mason's chest, listening to his heartbeat, she thought about how much had changed in just a few months. She had left Salt Lake City frightened and unsure, nearly lost her father, found herself alone and desperate in the desert. But from that desperation had come Mason, had come this love that filled her whole heart. "What are you thinking?" Mason murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her back. "I am thinking about the day you found me praying," Penelope said. "About how desperate I was, how certain I was that I would lose father, And then you appeared and said you were my answer." "You were my answer too," Mason said quietly. "I just did not know what the question was until I met you." Penelope propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "What was the question?" Mason cupped her face with his hand, his thumb stroking her cheek. "How do I live again instead of just surviving? How do I find joy after so much loss? How do I believe in good things?" You answered all of those questions just by being you. "I love you," Penelope whispered, "so very much. I love you too, more than I have words to say." They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Penelope had worried that adjusting to living together might be difficult, but instead it felt natural, like they had been made to fit together. They established routines quickly. Mason worked long days at the ranch and Penelope kept their home, cooked their meals, and helped Peter get his land fully operational. Peter had thrived since recovering from his fever. He threw himself into working his land, planting crops, acquiring chickens, and later a milk cow. He talked about eventually buying some cattle, about maybe breeding horses in partnership with Mason and Thomas. He had found purpose and peace in Tropic, and it showed in everything he did. One evening in late September, as Penelope and Mason sat on their porch watching the sunset, Penelope rested her hand on her stomach and gathered her courage. "Mason, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately attentive. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is very right, actually." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby. I am about 2 months along." Mason's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, joy, fear, then settling on overwhelming happiness. "Truly. We are going to be parents, yes, in the spring, probably April if my calculations are right." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby, our baby. Penelope, I can barely believe it. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I could burst." He pulled back to look at her. "Are you all right? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting out here? Is it too cold?" Penelope laughed at his sudden concern. "I am perfectly fine. It is still early, but I wanted to tell you. I could not keep it secret any longer." They told Peter the next day, and he was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He insisted Penelope take it easy, to let him and Mason handle any heavy work. Penelope appreciated the concern but had no intention of becoming an invalid for 9 months. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Penelope experienced some morning sickness, but nothing severe. As her belly grew, Mason became increasingly protective and attentive, always making sure she had everything she needed. His tenderness toward her deepened, if that was even possible, and Penelope fell even more in love with him watching him prepare for fatherhood. They spent the winter making plans and preparations. Mason built a beautiful cradle from wood he carefully selected and sanded until it was smooth as silk. Penelope sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands busy with nervous excitement. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about their hopes for their child. Spring arrived with sudden warmth, painting the desert in wildflowers. Penelope's time drew near, and Mason arranged to take time away from the ranch to be with her. He barely left her side those last few weeks, watching her anxiously for any sign that labor was beginning. When it finally started, on a warm April morning, Mason sent for Mrs. Henderson and the other women while he paced anxiously outside. Peter sat with him, the 2 men waiting together as they heard Penelope cry out occasionally from inside. "She is strong," Peter said firmly, seeing the fear on Mason's face. "She will be fine, and so will the baby." Mason nodded but could not shake his worry. Childbirth was dangerous. Women died from it all the time. And the thought of losing Penelope now, after finding her, after building this life together, was almost more than he could bear. Finally, after what felt like days but was only about 6 hours, they heard a new sound, the thin, reedy cry of a newborn. Mason was on his feet instantly, and moments later Mrs. Henderson appeared at the door, beaming. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy baby boy, and your wife did beautifully. Come meet your child." Mason rushed inside to find Penelope propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "We have a son," she said softly. "Mason, come meet your son." Mason approached on shaking legs and looked down at the baby. He was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same blue as his father's. Mason reached out with one finger and touched his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around it instinctively, and Mason felt something crack open in his chest. "He is perfect," Mason whispered. "Penelope, he is absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Carefully, terrified he might break something, Mason took his son into his arms. The baby settled against his chest, and Mason felt tears streaming down his face. This tiny person, this perfect combination of him and Penelope, was his to protect and raise and love. The responsibility of it was staggering, but so was the joy. "What shall we name him?" Penelope asked. They had discussed names for months but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking down at his son, Mason knew exactly what felt right. "Matthew," he said. "Matthew Peter Thatcher, after both our fathers." Penelope smiled through her tears. "Matthew, it is perfect." Peter was allowed in to meet his grandson, and the old man cried openly at the sight of the baby. "He looks like you did when you were born, Penny girl," he said wonderingly. "Same nose, same chin. He is beautiful." Those first weeks with baby Matthew were exhausting but wonderful. Mason threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He walked the floor with Matthew when he fussed at night, changed diapers without complaint, and gazed at his son with such obvious adoration that it made Penelope's heart swell. As the months passed, Matthew grew strong and healthy. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's smile, and he was clearly going to have his father's height based on how fast he was growing. Peter doted on his grandson shamelessly, coming by almost every day to play with the baby and help with chores so Penelope could rest. Life had settled into something beautiful and peaceful. Mason continued working at the Double T but was now a partner in the operation. Thomas had no children of his own and had begun treating Mason like a son, giving him increasing responsibility and a share in the ranch's profits. It meant their financial situation was more secure, and Mason was able to start building an addition onto their house, creating more space for their growing family. Because Penelope was pregnant again, much to everyone's delight. Matthew was about a year old when they discovered another baby was on the way. This pregnancy felt different, and Mrs. Henderson predicted it was a girl. She was right. In the winter of 1878, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby girl with her mother's dark hair and delicate features. They named her Grace, and she completed their family in a way none of them had anticipated. Mason, who had thought he could not love another child as much as he loved Matthew, discovered his heart was infinitely expandable. Grace had him wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she drew breath. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Matthew grew into a curious, energetic boy who wanted to be just like his father. Mason started teaching him about horses when he was barely big enough to walk, and the boy took to it naturally. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, with her mother's gentle nature and her father's determination. Peter continued to thrive, his land prospering, his health remaining good. He never remarried after Penelope's mother, content instead to pour his love into his daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren. He built a good life for himself in Tropic, became a respected member of the community, and was known for his fairness and generosity. Mason and Penelope's love only deepened with time. They still sat on their porch in the evenings after the children were asleep, talking about their days, making plans for the future. They still held hands when they walked. Mason still brought her wildflowers. Penelope still looked at him sometimes and marveled that this good, kind, strong man was hers. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason took Penelope back to the spot by the creek where they had first talked, where he had proposed. The children were with Peter for the evening, giving them rare time alone. "You remember the first time we came here?" Mason asked, pulling her down to sit beside him in the grass. "Of course. You told me about your family, about what happened in Kansas. I told you about my mother." "You gave me back my faith that day," Mason said quietly. "Not just in God, but in goodness, in the possibility of healing. I had been so angry for so long, so certain that the world was only full of pain and loss. Then you showed me that was not true." Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder. "You gave me hope when I had none left. You appeared exactly when I needed you most." "I used to think that was coincidence," Mason said. "Just luck that I heard that gunshot, that I happened to be on that road, but I do not think that anymore. I think you were right all those years ago. I think I was meant to find you. I think we were meant to find each other." "I know we were," Penelope agreed. "Everything we went through, everything that brought us to that moment, it all had purpose. I would not change any of it, even the hard parts, because it led me to you." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. 10 years ago, Penelope had been a frightened girl alone in the desert, certain she was losing everything that mattered. 10 years ago, Mason had been a man going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. Now they were here together, with a family and a home and a love that had only grown stronger through every challenge they faced. "I love you, Penelope Thatcher," Mason said, as he had said countless times over the past decade. "More now than the day I married you, if that is even possible." "It is possible," Penelope replied, tilting her face up to kiss him, "because I love you more now too. And I will love you more tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of our lives." They stayed by the creek until the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over them that first week when they were just learning to love each other. Then they walked home hand in hand, to the house Mason had built for them, to the children sleeping peacefully in their beds, to the life they had created together from prayer and desperation and hope. Years continued to pass in Tropic, Utah, bringing changes and challenges, but always grounded in the love that had started it all. Matthew grew into a young man who shared his father's gift with horses and his mother's compassionate heart. At 18, he started working full-time at the Double T alongside Mason, and Thomas began talking openly about leaving the ranch to Mason and Matthew when he passed. Grace blossomed into a beautiful young woman, intelligent and kind, beloved by everyone who knew her. She had inherited her mother's way with people, able to see the best in everyone, and she talked about becoming a teacher like the one who had taught her to read and write and think about the world. Peter lived to see both his grandchildren reach adulthood, a blessing he had never expected when he lay fevered and dying on the trail all those years ago. He passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, surrounded by family, having lived to see the land he had inherited become a thriving small ranch that Matthew would eventually take over and expand. Mason and Penelope mourned Peter deeply, but they took comfort in knowing he had lived a full life after they almost lost him. They took comfort in the legacy he had left, not just in land and property, but in the values he had instilled in his grandchildren, in the community he had helped build, in the way he had shown them all how to face hardship with grace and faith. On the 20th anniversary of the day Mason had found Penelope praying in the desert, they returned to that spot with their children. Matthew was 19 now, Grace was 17, and both of them knew the story of how their parents had met, had heard it told and retold throughout their childhoods. "This is where your father saved my life," Penelope told them, standing in the same place where she had knelt 2 decades before. "This is where I prayed for a miracle, and God sent me your father. And this is where your mother gave me a reason to believe in good things again," Mason added, his arm around Penelope's waist. "This is where our family really began." Matthew and Grace looked at the landscape, at the endless desert and the red cliffs, and they understood. This harsh, beautiful land had witnessed their parents' love story from the very beginning. It had tested them and shaped them and ultimately blessed them. "I hope I find something like what you two have," Grace said softly. "Love like yours seems rare." "It is not about finding it," Penelope said, touching her daughter's cheek gently. "It is about being open to it when it appears, even if the timing seems wrong or the circumstances seem impossible. It is about choosing each other every day through good times and hard times. That is what makes love last." Mason nodded. "And it is about being brave enough to be vulnerable, to let someone see all of you, even the broken parts. Your mother saw my brokenness and did not turn away. That changed everything." They rode back to the ranch together as the sun set, Matthew and Grace talking and laughing ahead of them, while Mason and Penelope followed more slowly, savoring these moments with their family. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked quietly. "Marrying me so quickly, building a life out here in this hard country?" Penelope looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Mason, these have been the happiest 20 years of my life. Every choice I made that led me to you, every hardship we faced together, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even nearly losing your father, even those 3 terrifying days in the desert, even those, because they brought me to you, they brought us here." She gestured around them at the land they had come to love, at their children riding ahead, at the life they had built. "This is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it." Mason smiled and leaned over to kiss her, even though they were on horseback and it was awkward. After 20 years, he still could not resist kissing his wife. Grace and Matthew noticed and exchanged amused glances. Their parents were not shy about showing affection, and while it was sometimes embarrassing when they were younger, now they understood it was something special. So many marriages in the territory were matters of convenience or necessity. Their parents had something different, something rare and precious, and it had created a home filled with love and laughter. More years passed. Matthew married a sweet girl named Sarah, whose family had recently moved to Tropic, and they gave Mason and Penelope their first grandchildren, twin boys who were the spitting image of their father. Grace married a teacher who had come west from Boston, a man who shared her love of books and learning, and they settled in Tropic to help establish a real school for the growing town. Mason and Penelope grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes and mouths. But they still sat on their porch every evening. They still held hands. Mason still brought Penelope wildflowers when he found them. She still looked at him sometimes and marveled that this man was hers. Thomas Thornton passed away when Mason was 52, leaving the Double T Ranch to Mason and Matthew as he had promised. It was bittersweet, losing the man who had been like a father to Mason, But they honored his memory by continuing to run the ranch with the same integrity and fairness Thomas had always shown. The ranch thrived under their management, becoming one of the most respected horse operations in Utah Territory. People came from miles around to buy horses bred and trained by the Thatchers, knowing they were getting quality animals handled by men who understood and respected them. Peter Grant's land, now run by Matthew's twin sons as they grew older, also prospered. The family had become one of the pillars of the Tropic community, known for their generosity and kindness. They helped new settlers get established, donated to the school and church, and were always the first to assist when neighbors faced hardship. On a warm June evening, as the sun set over the red cliffs they had loved for so long, Mason and Penelope sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 70s now, grandparents many times over, their faces weathered by sun and wind and the passage of time. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" Penelope asked, her hand in his as always. "When you found me praying." "I said a lot of things that day," Mason replied with a smile. "Which part do you mean?" "When I told you I had been praying for help, for anyone to save us. You knelt beside me and said you were my answer. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember. It was the truest thing I have ever said." Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder, comfortable and content. "I have been thinking about that a lot lately. About prayer and answers and how God works in our lives. That day I was so desperate, so certain I was losing everything. And then you appeared and you were the answer to my prayer. But Mason, you were not just the answer to my prayer that day." "What do you mean?" "You have been the answer to prayers I did not even know to pray. You gave me love and partnership and adventure. You gave me children and grandchildren and a life full of joy. You were the answer to prayers about my future that I had not even thought to ask yet." Mason tightened his arm around her. "You were the same for me. You gave me back my life, my faith, my ability to feel joy again. You gave me a family to replace the one I lost. You were the answer to every question I had about whether life could be good again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Around them, they could hear the sounds of their family, grandchildren playing in the yard, Grace and her husband talking in the garden, Matthew and Sarah preparing dinner. The sounds of a life well lived, of love multiplied across generations. "If you could go back," Mason said softly, "back to that day in the desert and change anything, would you?" Penelope did not hesitate. "Not a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Mason agreed. "Though I admit some of those moments were terrifying while we were living through them." Penelope laughed. "Like when Matthew was 3 and fell in the creek, and you jumped in fully clothed to save him, even though the water was only 2 feet deep." "He could have drowned," Mason protested, but he was smiling. "I was protecting my son." Or when Grace decided to bring home that injured coyote pup and it lived in our house for 2 months. "That animal was a menace," Mason said. "Chewed through everything we owned. But you let her keep it because you could not say no to her." "Still cannot say no to her," Mason admitted. "Or to you, for that matter." They continued reminiscing as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast desert sky. They talked about their wedding day, about the births of their children, about the first time Matthew successfully broke a horse on his own, about Grace's face when she graduated from the teaching program in Salt Lake City. They talked about Peter and how much they still missed him. They talked about Thomas and the legacy he had left them. Eventually, the family began gathering for dinner, calling them inside. But Mason and Penelope stayed a moment longer, reluctant to end this perfect evening. "Thank you," Mason said quietly. "For what?" "For praying that day. For not giving up on your father. for being brave enough to love me, for saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for every day since then. Thank you for choosing me, Penelope. Thank you for being my answer, Penelope replied, that day and every day since. Thank you for finding me, for saving us, for building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly the man I needed, even when I did not know what I needed. They kissed, a soft, sweet kiss that still held all the love and promise of their first kiss 35 years ago. Then they stood, Mason helping Penelope to her feet with the same gentle courtesy he had always shown, and they walked inside to join their family for dinner. The meal was loud and chaotic and wonderful, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, children asking for more food, adults discussing ranch business and town gossip. Mason sat at the head of the table with Penelope beside him, and he looked around at all the faces gathered there, all the lives that had come from that one desperate prayer in the desert, from one cowboy hearing a gunshot and deciding to investigate. After dinner, as the family lingered around the table, Matthew raised his glass. "A toast," he said, waiting for everyone to quiet down. "To my parents who showed us all what real love looks like, who taught us that faith and hard work and kindness matter, who built something beautiful out here in this hard land and shared it with all of us. Ma, Pa, thank you for everything." To Ma and Pa, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Mason felt tears prick his eyes, something that happened more easily as he got older. He looked at Penelope and saw she was crying openly, happy tears streaming down her face. He took her hand and squeezed it, and she squeezed back, the simple gesture carrying all the love and gratitude and joy they felt. That night, lying in bed with Penelope curved against his side as she had done for 35 years, Mason thought about the journey that had brought them here. He thought about the young man he had been, angry and broken, drifting across the West trying to escape his pain. He thought about the moment he had heard that gunshot and made the decision to investigate rather than continue on his way. Such a small decision, but it had changed everything. He thought about Penelope, on her knees in the dust, desperate and afraid but still faithful enough to pray. He thought about how she had looked up at him with those eyes full of hope and fear, and how something in his chest had cracked open right then, letting in light he had not felt in 6 years. He thought about every moment since, the courtship and the wedding and the years of building a life together. He thought about the children they had raised, the grandchildren now filling their lives with noise and chaos and love. He thought about the ranch and the land and the community they had helped build. It was a good life. More than good. It was exactly the life he had needed, even when he had not believed such a life was possible. "What are you thinking about?" Penelope murmured sleepily. "Just how grateful I am," Mason replied, "for all of it, for you most of all. I am grateful too, every day." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done countless times before, as they would do countless times more. Outside, the desert night was cool and peaceful, stars blazing in the clear sky. The land that had tested them and shaped them now cradled them gently, as though it too was grateful for the love story it had witnessed. Mason and Penelope lived many more years together, seeing their grandchildren grow and marry, welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. They never lost the wonder they felt in each other's presence. They never stopped holding hands. They never stopped thanking God for that day in the desert when a desperate prayer met a lonely cowboy and both their lives changed forever. When Mason finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, Penelope held his hand and told him she loved him one last time. She grieved deeply, but not bitterly, knowing they had been blessed with far more years together than most people ever got. She knew they would be reunited someday, that this was just a temporary separation. She lived another 3 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling and retelling the story of how she and Mason met, making sure the legacy of their love would continue through the generations. She told them about prayer and faith and the importance of being open to unexpected blessings. She told them about choosing love every day, about being brave enough to be vulnerable, about building something beautiful even in hard places. When Penelope passed, surrounded by family in the same house Mason had built for them so long ago, her last words were a whispered prayer of thanksgiving. She thanked God for answered prayers for Mason, for the life they had built together. She thanked God for every moment, every challenge, every joy. They buried her beside Mason on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the red cliffs and the endless desert sky. The whole town came to the funeral, people whose lives had been touched by the Thatchers' kindness and generosity. Story after story was shared about the love Mason and Penelope had shown not just to each other, but to everyone around them, about the way they had made Tropic a better place just by being part of it. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story of Mason and Penelope, of the cowboy who found a girl praying for a miracle and said he was her answer. The story became part of family legend, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments come right before the dawn, that prayers are heard even when we feel most alone, that love can grow even in the harshest desert if tended with faith and commitment. The land the Thatchers had loved and worked remained in the family for generations, each new generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation Mason and Penelope had laid. The house was expanded and modernized, but never demolished, the original room where they had started their married life preserved as a testament to humble beginnings. The Double T Ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful horse operations in Utah. People still came from miles around to buy Thatcher horses, knowing they were getting animals descended from the stock Mason himself had bred and trained with such care and knowledge. In Tropic, a plaque was eventually placed at the spot by the creek where Mason and Penelope had spent so many hours together. It reads simply, "Here, love grew, Mason and Penelope Thatcher, who showed us all what devotion looks like." The creek still ran clear and cold, the cottonwood still provided shade, and couples still came to that spot to talk and dream and build their own love stories, inspired by the example of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set in brilliant colors over the red cliffs, people said you could feel something special in that spot by the creek, a sense of peace and hope and possibility. It was as though the love Mason and Penelope had shared there had soaked into the very earth, sanctifying that ground and blessing all who came after. Their story became a reminder that miracles do happen, that prayers are answered, and that sometimes the answer to our most desperate plea comes in the form of another broken person who needs us as much as we need them. It was a reminder that love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who sees your imperfections and chooses you anyway. It was a reminder that the greatest love stories often begin in the most unlikely circumstances, when two people find each other in the wilderness and decide to build something beautiful together. Mason and Penelope's legacy lived on not just in the land and the ranch and the family they had created, but in the example they had set. They had shown that love is a choice made every day, that forgiveness and faith can heal even the deepest wounds, that building a life together is the greatest adventure of all. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes, when we are at our lowest point, when we are on our knees in the dust praying for help, God sends us exactly what we need. And sometimes, what we need is not a miracle that changes our circumstances, but a person who walks through those circumstances with us, holding our hand, sharing our burdens, multiplying our joys. Mason had been the answer to Penelope's prayer that day in the desert, but the truth was that Penelope had been the answer to Mason's unspoken prayers too. They had saved each other in every way a person can be saved. And in doing so, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lives, touching everyone who knew them and everyone who heard their story. In the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave, proof that love matters, that kindness matters, that choosing to be good and faithful and true makes a difference in the world. Mason and Penelope Thatcher had lived those values every day of their marriage, and the ripples of their love continued to spread outward, touching lives and changing hearts long after they were gone. Their story began with a desperate prayer in the Utah desert, and a cowboy brave enough to say he was the answer. It unfolded into a love that weathered every storm, celebrated every joy, and grew deeper with each passing year. And it ended not with death, but with legacy, with generations of children raised on the example of what real love looks like, with a community made better by their presence, with a testament to the power of faith and hope and choosing love even when life is hard. This was the story of Mason and Penelope Thatcher, and it was a story worth telling again and again. A reminder to all who heard it that miracles do happen, prayers are answered, and true love, tended with care and commitment, can bloom even in the desert and last beyond a lifetime.